To you.
Helen, thank you very much for that. We've popped out to one of the lovely courtyards of Parliament House on this Canberra spring afternoon, and we're joined by Treasurer Scott Morrison. Thank you very much for speaking to us this afternoon.
Thanks, David.
Can I start with what's happened on the share market today? It's down nearly 4%, worst result in 2 years, below 5,000 points, the ASX. Are you worried about that?
Well, these are obviously difficult days and there's lots of headwinds. We already know that, and I think the issue for the Australian economy, for Australians more generally, is we know that we have to swim against the tide in many respects, but we're swimming against the tide, I think, incredibly well, and our focus as a government is to do everything we can to back Australians and back Australian business to get from where we are now to where we need to be in the future. And there will be days like this. There will be changes to how people make forecasts and things like that overseas, and we need to take all of that in our stride, because what we have to focus on is what we have to do, rather than becoming overly focused on the things that are happening externally.
It is the big miners that are dragging down the market here. It's happening around the world, and it's driven by concerns internationally about China and what's happening in the Chinese economy. Now, I know Joe Hockey was pretty optimistic about the growth story in China. How do you view what's happening in China at the moment?
Well, I think it's well summarised that obviously growth rates out of China weren't what they used to be 10 years ago, but a 10% growth rate 10 years ago is as good as a 7% growth rate today, becoming off a much higher base. And all of these economies are going through transitions, including our own. And so the issue is, what do we do about it? And what we have to focus on is our resilience, our strength, who we're going to trade with, how we're going to transition, and how we're going to deal with the things that we have control over, whether it's on controlling our spending or whether it's ensuring that our tax system can support people to do all the things they need to do.
We are closely tied to what happens in China. Is China going to grow more strongly, or is it going to weaken?
Well, I'll leave others to make the forecasts on this, and it's not my job to make those forecasts. There are plenty of people who will provide those forecasts.
You've got some of the best, apparently, advising yous.
Absolutely, but my job, the government's job, is not to respond to every figure and every event. It's to put in place a set of very strong policies, a strong budget discipline, a tax system that can help people make the decisions and do the things they want to do in the economy, to help people transition through what will be a time of change, so we come out on the other side. And the good news is this: I believe we will get to the other side strongly, and we'll be stronger as a result as a country, and more prosperous as a country.
When you are setting those tax and spending priorities, you've got to have a good idea, haven't you, of what's going on in the economy, what's happening, what revenue is going to come in and what's not.
Of course we do, and we do. And
so are you optimistic about China?
Well, China will have its impact on our economy like it will on many economies. They're our biggest trading partner, and that's why the China Free Trade Agreement is so important. That's why it's there. A government that actually saw the opportunity and was able to realise it where others have failed to do so. So we are doing what is in our control, I think, to make the most of our opportunities out of China. Now, what will happen in China will be a matter for how they set themselves and the decisions they take there. What matters at our end is what we do about it. And as a government, we're very focused on what our response has to be, how we make ourselves stronger, more competitive, and backing Australians, because we do. We think Australians have the ability to deal with all of these challenges.
Well, China has also in recent days announced that it will introduce an emissions trading scheme in 2017, that it will apply to a whole range of key sectors, including steel and iron ore production. What is this going to mean for Australian exports of coal and iron ore?
Well, I mean, we obviously have our own policy on these things, and we're taking those to Paris, and I know that's a separate issue to what you've raised with me, and we'll obviously be looking closely about what all of those decisions will mean for our own performance as an economy and how that impacts on our growth. And that's how the process works and how people fashion the growth forecasts, which in turn set what our receipts will be and potentially what it might impact even on our payments.
So it will have an impact on all of that?
Well, what I'm saying is you've got to look at all that, you've got to assess it, but the point I keep making, David, is this. We're not going to run around jumping every time something happens overseas. That would not be a smart strategy. We need to be confident in our economy's underlying resilience and strength. We need to be confident in the ability of our people and our businesses to be able to move through this transition, and we need to back their confidence. And the way we back their confidence is the policies we put in place in terms of tax, the way we keep our own spending under control and ensure that we don't don't increase the tax burden on the income they are earning to chase spending down the road.
But I'm just trying to establish whether China's new climate policy will hurt our coal and iron ore exports.
Well, look, I don't think those are things that anyone can have a crystal ball on, David. I mean, the real impact of those on how the Chinese economy operates and what decisions are taken, I think everyone will have a view about that, and I don't think there's
yours is pretty important, isn't it? Because this is about how the economy's run and what sort of revenue you can bank on.
Well, David, you're talking about one specific policy of one, albeit our largest trading partner, and I'm not going to go and prognosticate on those sorts of things, regardless of what the impact.
Treasury surely will, won't they?
Well, David, but regardless of what the impact of those decisions are in China, it doesn't change what we have to do at this end. And it's my job to put in place the right policies and the right budgetary policies to make Australia stronger to deal with whatever happens. And Australians will sit at home and they'll go, well, what does all this mean for me? What does it mean for me? And what they want to see from the government is we are doing the right things to make them as strong as they possibly can to deal with the changes that inevitably are coming towards us, and we need to back their ability to get through them, and I think Australians will, and we believe in them to do that.
Can I just get your view as Treasurer now on an ETS? China's going to have one, Europe's already got one, New Zealand, South Korea, California. Will the Australian government at any point revisit whether we should move in that direction?
Well, David, our policies on that are very clear, aren't they? I mean, you know what they are. We're taking them to Paris. We have our programs in place, and Greg Hunt has championed those over a long time, and they're working.
I'm just wondering, is it a philosophical objection to an ETS? I mean, what's the argument for not having one?
We're doing what's working. It's working, so we're going to keep doing it.
But if China and Europe, which I think together will represent some 2/3 or whatever of the global economy.
Well, it's not clear the full extent of what they're moving towards. True. And the practical effect of all of those things, but they will make their choices as countries. We will make our choices, and the choices that we've made are working. So we're going to keep pursuing them. So
this won't be considered by Australia.
We're going to do what's working, David. I keep saying this. This is what we're going to do. If it works, we're going to keep doing it. I think that's common sense. I think there's been an outbreak of common sense.
Let me turn to the mini summit that the Prime Minister has called for Thursday here in Canberra. Follows the National Reform Summit a month ago with business union welfare groups that were involved in all of this. We heard what they had to say. It was a lengthy, a very good day-long session there. Why does the government need to hear from them again?
Well, we should always be listening. I mean, that's what good governments do. You're always listening. They've got a large number of people together. And
this was only a few weeks ago, though. They've got something different to say? Or?
Well, no, this is a good opportunity for them to bring their considered collective views directly and discuss it with the senior ministers in the government. Now, I wouldn't describe it as a summit. I'd describe it as a meeting. A meeting, and we'll listen very carefully to what they were able to discuss on that day and what their suggestions are going forward. But one of the most important things I think together we can accomplish is this. Whether it's particularly in the tax system, where they've had a lot of discussions about that, how do we take the Australian people with us about the sort of changes you need to make to your tax system that actually will boost economic growth going forward? Because there are two schools of thought when it comes to tax. One is you need a tax system that draws more out of the income we're earning as a country. And sadly, I think that's the view that the Labor Party has taken. Our view is you need a tax system that inspires growth, because that's what deals with your revenue challenge. Just because revenue is less than expenditure at the moment doesn't mean you necessarily have an issue when it comes to where your revenue is going to go in the future. There are two ways you can deal with that. You can try and suck more tax out of what people are earning, or you can try and have a tax system that builds your revenue over time because it builds growth.
I'm interested, though, because in that summit a few weeks ago, and I sat there listening to a lot of it, there was, as you say, a lot of talk about the revenue side of things, about the GST, about superannuation tax breaks. I don't think there was agreement on one spending cut, one specific area of spending restraint, which is what you've said is the problem, spending.
Well, it is the problem because, you know, if you have a spending problem, then you will have a revenue problem, because you will be trying to forever chase your spending with your revenue. And that's why I believe Chris Bowen does have a revenue problem, because he's got a spending problem, and he's got a $50 billion hole in what his projections are going to be if they were to follow their policies. But from our perspective, it's about ensuring when you control expenditure and then you have revenue is based on the nation's economy earning more. I want the economy to earn more. Now, that's obviously taken some hits with movements in commodity prices and things of that nature. That will impact your earnings. Wage growth has been actually quite modest and quite low. That impacts what people are earning. Now, if people are earning less, the government is earning less. And so the answer to that is not to suck more tax out of the system and out of people's pockets. It's to actually grow income, because when you grow income, you grow the revenue base, and that's how you get the budget back in balance.
Does that mean a personal income tax break paid for through the GST?
Well, the design features of what you come up with, I think, is the second question. The first question is, do you need to do this at all? And I think there is a broadening consensus. When you have the average taxpayer, the average wage earner, I should say, in this country, about to move into the second highest tax bracket at $80,000 next year, you've got a problem with the incentives in your tax system. Now, that is not a sustainable position any more than 26% of GDP as spending is a sustainable position. I'd make this point. If spending to GDP was the same as it was when Peter Costello left as Treasurer, we would be in surplus today. It was 23.1%. It's gone up 3 percentage points since then, and revenue as a percentage of GDP has only fallen 1. And I think that gives you an indication of where the problem is.
It's superannuation. Let me just clarify this, because this came through loud and clear from all of these key groups at the summit. Business groups, welfare, ACT, you all agree something needs to be done about those tax breaks at the top end.
Well, what I said when this position has been put to me, and it was well discussed at that summit, as you've said, is we want to look at the system and any idea that is going to encourage Australians to work more and work more effectively and work more productively, that is going to save more effectively for their future, and not just for their retirement, but to save to buy a house or to save to do whatever they want to do as a family and as an individual, and invest more in more productive enterprises, invest in business. Anything that does that, David, we're looking at. That's the rule. We're not into the rule out game on the features. We know what the benefits need to be, and if there are measures that are going to achieve those benefits, great, let's look at them.
I've got to ask, Tony Abbott said today that no policies have changed and no phrasing has changed from you and Malcolm Turnbull, but I suppose what you are saying on superannuation is a bit of a change.
Well, we'll wait and see what the outcomes are of all of these discussions. But I think there has been, an opening up of what is being prepared to be considered, but not an opening up for any ideological purpose or anything like that. I think there's a very fresh breeze of pragmatism about some of these issues. And what that will lead to is saying, well, at the end of the day, we're doing this to help the Australian people get from where they are right now. And, I think, quite rightly, that we'll look overseas and we'll look what's happening in other places, and people will look at these things and have some concern. But then they'll look to the government and say, well, what are you doing about that? We will back them to get from here to there, and I believe they will get there, and they'll get there under the policies that we will be advocating, pursuing and implementing.
Treasurer Scott Morrison, thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, David.